Hello and welcome back. And we are starting the next lesson, lesson number 7, which is actually the start of a 4-part section of training because it deals with a very important aspect of leadership, something that we learned from Jesus himself, and that is how to be a servant leader. And this is a common phrase amongst Christian leaders these days, is being a servant leader. Unfortunately, not all leaders are servant leaders. And so we're going to look at what it is to be a servant leader, and we'll look at some scripture references that deal with examples of being a servant leader. To begin with, we're going to look at something that Max Dupree once said. He said, the first responsibility of a leader is to define reality. The last is to say thank you. In between the two, the leader must become a servant and a debtor. That sums up the progress of an artful leader. Couldn't be said better. Bill Gothard said, a servant is someone who gets excited about someone else's success. And that is so true. Servant leadership has become a common term in the world of business. But before there was any talk of servant leadership in the marketplace, Jesus laid down the foundation for this style of leadership. However, in Jesus' case, it was not just a leadership style to be selected from a list of other possible styles. It was a permanent lifestyle. Servant leadership was not initiated by Jesus, although throughout the history of God's dealings with his people, leaders were referred to as servants. Abraham was the servant of God in Genesis 26:24. Moses was a servant of God in Exodus 14:31, Numbers 12:7-8, and several others. Joshua was the servant of God in Exodus 33:11. Caleb, the servant of God in Numbers 14:24. Samuel, the servant of God in 1 Samuel 3:9. Elijah was the servant of God in 2 Kings 9:36. Elijah was the servant of God in Isaiah 22. And so on, etc. Jesus, however, is the one who brought definition to the concept of approaching the subject head on, or by approaching the subject head on. Jesus emphasized the fact that a leader is not just a servant of the Lord, but a God-appointed leader is also to be servant of people. First off, where did Jesus establish the foundation for servant leadership? Well, Jesus laid the foundation for servant leadership in several key passages recorded in the New Testament. In Matthew chapter 20, verses 20 through 28, also in Mark chapter 10, verses 35 through 45, we read, Then the mother of Zebedee's son came to him with her sons, kneeling down and asking something from him. And he said to her, What do you wish? She said, Grant that these 2 sons of mine may sit one on your right and the other on your left in your kingdom. Jesus answered and said, You don't know what you ask. Are you able to drink the cup that I am able to drink and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized? And they said to him, We are able. So he said to them, You will indeed drink my cup and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with. But to sit on my right hand and on my left is not mine to give, but it is for those for whom it is prepared by my Father. And when the 10 heard, they were greatly displeased with the 2 brothers. But Jesus called them to himself and said, You know that the rulers of Galilee, the rulers of the Gentiles, lord it over them, and those who are great exercise authority over them. Yet it shall not be so among you. But whoever desires to become great among you, let him be your servant. And whoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. Nice. From this passage, notice the following things. Number one, James and John's mother came to Jesus on behalf of her sons, no doubt because to ask for such a thing for oneself would seem selfish and prideful. Number two, the request that was made was not a small request, since Jesus only has one right hand and one left hand. These two disciples essentially wanted to be the first among the other disciples of Jesus, and second and third to Jesus alone. How prideful was this? This placement would put them in front of every person who had ever lived or who would ever live, including such people as Noah, Abraham, Moses, Elijah, Jeremiah, and John the Baptist, just to name a few. From the future perspective, this would place them in front of Martin Luther, John Calvin, John Wesley, Billy Graham, and all those yet to come in the eternal purpose of God. Number three, the request of the disciples did not involve serving. It involved sitting. Sitting is a receiving position, not a serving position. Note that Mary and Martha also intended this or saw this in Matthew 8:15. And let me read that for you just for a moment. It's actually chapter 8, verses 14 and 15. And it says, "Now when Jesus had come into Peter's house, he saw his wife's mother lying sick with a fever. So he touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she arose and served them." Number four, Jesus reminded these disciples that ministry placement was not about, gaining a position for yourself. It was about God's placement and God's calling on your life. Number five, Jesus told the disciples that they did not know what they were asking because they had not taken into account that any placement in the kingdom had a level of suffering that went with it. It is one thing to desire a ministry, but are you prepared to pay the price for it? Number six, the other disciples were very upset, primarily because they wanted those same two seats, and their mothers were not present to plead their case. The word used to describe the disciples' reaction in this passage means that the other disciples expressed displeasure, were offended, irate, incensed, and even angry. Number seven, Jesus let his disciples know that they were acting like the unredeemed. They were copying a leadership model that had been demonstrated by the Romans and by many of the religious leaders of that day, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, etc. Number eight, Jesus let his disciples know that leadership is not being in a position to exercise authority over people, but being in a position to serve people. Number nine, Jesus indicated that there is nothing wrong with the desire to be great as long as you were willing to follow his path to greatness, laying your life down for others. Number 10, Jesus used two different words in this passage relative to what a leader is to be to others. The first, the servant of all. This is a Greek word, diakonos. The word refers to someone who executes the commands of another, especially of a master. This person is a servant or an attendant who ministers to the needs of another. Some feel that the root of this word is most likely dioko, which means to run or hasten on errands. Others believe that this word comes from the Greek word diakonis, which means in the dust laboring or running through dust. Places where forms of this word occur include the following. In Matthew 4:11, it is used of the angels that ministered to Jesus after his temptation in the wilderness. In Matthew 25:44, it is used of ministering to the poor, naked, hungry, and those in prison. In Matthew 8:3, it is used of a woman and others who ministered to Jesus in the area of material goods providing for his substance. In Luke chapter 10, verse 40, it is used of Martha serving the guest in her house. In John 2:5 and verse 9, it is used of the servants who drew the water at the wedding at Cana of Galilee. And it was used in Acts chapter 6, verse 2. It is used of serving tables of ministering to the needs of the widows. The second word is the word slave. In verse 27, he says, the slave of all. This is a Greek word, doulos. This word takes it even further and refers to someone who has no rights at all, but is a slave, a bondman, and a person of servile condition. It is usually applied to someone who is in a permanent relationship of servitude to another. It is used metaphorically of someone who gives himself up to another's will and is devoted to others to the disregard of their own interests. Places where forms of the word occur include the following. Matthew chapter 8, verse 9, where it refers to a servant who simply does what he is told to do by his master. In Matthew 25:21, it describes all of the servants of the Lord who have been found faithful. In many places, this word is put in the context of lordship and refers to someone who answers to a lord or master. And you can see this in Matthew chapter 10, verses 24 to 25, chapter 18, verse 27, chapter 24, verses 46 and 50. This is the most common term used to describe our relationship to the Lord. We are all the bondservants of the Lord. In Luke chapter 22, verse 24 through 30, we read of an account that seems to be a different occasion to that of the previously stated, and it demonstrates how the disciples loved to debate among themselves over which one of them was the greatest. Let's take a look at it. It says, now there was also a dispute among them as to which of them should be considered the greatest. And he, Jesus, said to them, the kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and those who exercise authority over them are called benefactors. But not so among you. On the contrary, he who is greatest among you, let him be as your younger, and he who governs as he who serves. For who is greater, is he who sits at the table or he who serves? Is it not he who sits at the table? Yet I am among you as the one who serves. But you are those who have continued with me in my trials. And I bestow upon you a kingdom, just as my Father bestowed one upon me, that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. From this passage, notice some additional things. First of all, the disciples seem to be consumed with a desire to be greater than the rest of the other disciples. They were constantly comparing themselves. This was a favorite debate among them. Perhaps in their debating, they could make a case for themselves. Peter could have claimed preeminence because of the word that he was given to him by Jesus in Matthew 16. But then the rest of the disciples would have burst his bubble and brought him back down to earth by reminding him that he denied the Lord. John could have claimed preeminence as the disciple who Jesus loved in John chapter 13, verse 23. But then the rest of the disciples would have burst his bubble and reminded him when Jesus had to rebuke him for a contrary spirit. Bartholomew, he could have claimed preeminence as a disciple because nothing negative was recorded about him. But the rest of the disciples would have reminded him that nothing positive was said about him either. And secondly, the disciples liked the idea of exercising lordship and governing, fancy titles and sitting at the table, but they were not too excited about serving. Let's take a look at Luke chapter 22, verses 24 through 27. Within minutes, they were bickering over who of them would end up the greatest. But Jesus intervened. Kings like to throw their weight around, and people in authority like to give themselves fancy titles. It's not going to be that way with you. Let the senior among you become like the junior. Let the leader act the part of the servant. Who would you rather be, the one who eats the dinner or the one who serves the dinner? You'd rather eat and be served, right? But I've taken my place among you as the one who serves. Now, this translation comes from the Message Bible, and I think it's a great translation to shine some light on the wording, help us to truly understand what's being said here. It's very important that we do understand the true role of a leader. It appears that even after Jesus washed the feet of the disciples and gave them the challenge to do likewise, that they were still arguing about this subject. And we see this in Luke 22, 14 through 34, and with John chapter 13, verses 1 through 17. Some concepts just take a long time to sink in. We're hard-headed, especially something that is contrary to the person's nature. You can also look at Matthew 23:11 and Mark 9:33. How did Jesus distinguish between servant leadership and other models? Jesus let his disciples know that they were acting like the unredeemed. They were copying a leadership model that had been demonstrated by the Romans and by many of the religious leaders of that day. What did this unredeemed leadership look like? Jesus made it very clear what this type of leadership looked like in some of his references to the Pharisees and religious leaders. Take a look at Matthew chapter 6, verses 1 through 7, and chapter 23, verses 1 through 36. Right now, we're going to take a look at Matthew 6, 1 through 7. It says, "Take heed that you do not do your charitable deeds before men, to be seen by them. Otherwise, you have no reward from your Father in heaven. Therefore, when you do a charitable deed, do not sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have glory from men. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward. But when you do a charitable deed, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, that your charitable deed may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will himself reward you openly. And when you pray, you shall not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the corners of the streets, that they may be seen by men. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward. But you, when you pray, go into your room, and when you have shut the door, pray to your Father who is in the secret place. And your Father, who sees in secret, will reward you openly. And when you pray, do not use vain repetitions as the heathens do, for they think that they will be heard for their many words." Wow. Matthew 23, read Matthew 23 as time permits. It's really filled with some good stuff in here. In these passages, Jesus indicated that the unredeemed leaders love the chief or best seats in the synagogue. They love to have titles of authority applied to them. They love the ceremony and the ritual of their position. They love to be in the spotlight and to be seen by others. They love to impress people with their knowledge, even though they did not practice what they preached. They served when it was in their best interest to serve. They served when they had everybody's attention. If you look at Matthew 23, verses 11 through 12, it says, that Jesus said to the Pharisees, "But he who is greatest among you shall be your servant, and whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted." Heavy. How did Jesus describe wrong leadership? Jesus had some rather unkind names or symbols for wrong leaders. One was hypocrites. He used that a lot. Matthew 23:13 says it. The word hypocrite was a term that was originally applied to actors on a stage. An actor is a person who plays a role that is assigned to them by a casting director. The actor plays a part that is not necessarily in any way connected with who they are as a real person. If you have been an actor long enough, even you do not know who the real you is. The word hypocrite eventually came to mean any pretender. It referred to a person who was not actually what they proclaimed themselves to be. It referred to a person who played the role in life that was expected of them, but that role was not who they really were in their heart of hearts. What about blind guides? This is another term that Jesus used. We see this in Matthew 23:16. A blind guide is someone who purports to be able to lead others to a desired destination, but they cannot see where they are going. This word refers to people who claim to be able to give directions, but they are trying to guide people to places that they have never seen or where they have not been. The result of this type of leadership is that both the guide and the one who is being guided miss the mark and fall into the ditch. Another phrase was whitewashed tombs, Matthew 23:27. Because touching dead things in the Old Testament made a person ceremonially unclean. The Jews would whitewash the tombs so that travelers, especially those attending the feast, would not accidentally come into contact with them, and they could be easily avoided. In this case, the graves were kept clean and white on the outside, which was in striking contrast to what was actually on the inside. The religious leaders of the day looked so good on the outside with their rites and rituals and ceremonial attire, but on the inside were filled with corruption. Those who would unwittingly partake of their fruit would become defiled themselves. Another phrase was unmarked graves. We see this in Luke chapter 11, verse 44. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you are like graves which are not seen, and the men who walk over them are not aware of them. This picture of wrong leaders is almost the opposite of the previous. In this case, Jesus refers to them as unmarked graves, at least in the New International Version. Adam Clarke says that the religious leaders are like hidden tombs, graves which were not distinguished by any outward decorations and were not elevated above the ground, so that those who walked over them did not consider what corruption was within. As one might unconsciously walk over a grave concealed from view and thus contract ceremonial defilement, so the plausible exterior of the Pharisees kept people from perceiving the pollution they contracted from coming in contact with such corrupt characters. That was a statement made by Jameson, Fawcett, and Brown. Another phrase or term used is serpents. We see this in Matthew 23:33. The image of the serpent goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden, where the devil-inspired serpent sought to mislead Adam and Eve and actually became an instrument of destruction in their lives. Another phrase is brood of vipers. Wow. Every time I read that, it kind of gave me the chills. Vipers are different than serpents in a way because the word viper usually refers to a poisonous snake. They have the power to inject poison into you that can either make you extremely ill or kill you. John the Baptist had identified those leaders in the same way when they came to his baptism. You see that in Matthew chapter 3, verses 5 through 10. Let me read that for you. It says, Then Jerusalem, all Judea, and all the region around the Jordan went out to him and were baptized by him in the Jordan, confessing their sins. But when he saw many of the Pharisees and Sadducees coming to his baptism, he said to them, Brood of vipers, who warned you to flee from the wrath to come? Therefore, bear fruits worthy of repentance. And do not think to say to yourselves, We have Abraham as our father. For I say to you that God is able to raise up children to Abraham from these stones. And even now, the axe is laid to the root of the trees. Therefore, every tree which does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. In this case, the Pharisees saw the multitudes responding. They did not want to appear to be out of step with what was taking place because they always wanted to be seen as spiritual, and they always cared about popular opinion. John realized that these leaders were only putting on a show, and that in their hearts they were not repentant, and that they were not interested in real change. The Pharisees thought that their spiritual lineage was enough for them. John let them know that their relationship to Abraham was insufficient to be considered part of the tree of faith. Good fruit based on repentance and a right relationship to God was the important thing. So I hope you got a lot out of this. There's a lot of great information here, and I really recommend that you go back and read not only Matthew 23, but all of the areas that we've discussed today. Take a look at those and examine your own life. Ask yourself the questions. Am I a Pharisee? Am I a scribe or a Sadducee? Am I acting like them? Do I put on a facade? Do I show people what I want to be seen like, or do I show myself as I truly am? Am I being transparent with people? It's a lot to consider here, and we're going to continue these studies as we go along. And like I said, I truly hope you really get the concept, not only get the concept, but live the life of a true servant leader. Till next time, Dr. Thomas Moore saying good night, God bless, and I love each and every one of you.